I interviewed 66 grandparents in depth about their lived experiences, both getting information about their views on grandparenting, but also the reasons for their inability to have any kind of relationship. The first thing I found was that this group of grandparents is really in acute distress. They were all grandparents which had a previous good relationship with their grandchildren, and then after the divorce of their adult child, usually the father, in cases where the father was alienated from the child, the grandparents too lost contact with their grandchildren. So that really opened the eyes of many people to the fact that grandparents are among the most vulnerable and high-risk group. Of the 66 grandparents, I guess over 40, maybe 46, had not had contact with their grandchildren because of the alienation from their own adult children. There is this hidden group out there, and they're quite sizable population because this was one association. Immediately I had 100 grandparents contacting me. They really felt that their issues were unique and worthy of further study. These are grandparents who have never met their grandchildren, never seen their grandchildren, in many cases only learned by accident that they are grandparents. They seem to be even more overwhelmed by the grief and the loss. Well, it's not even loss because they've never seen their grandchildren. I really wanted to know, why, what were the reasons? And the most startling finding was that these grandparents were actually alienated parents. They were alienated from their own children many years ago when the children were young. Now the children grew up and they themselves were now adult children, married, and with their own children. So these grandparents had actually had no contact over such a long period of time with their own children. In a way, they're suffering a double loss. And I was just really struck by how acute their feelings were of loss. They're still grieving the loss of their own children, but when grandchildren appear on the scene, things get worse. And so they reported all the kind of major effects of a major loss, of bereavement, grief, trauma reaction, finding themselves extremely isolated, unable to really talk about their issues, so pained by the fact that their friends and people from their own generation were very much involved with their grandchildren, and they couldn't even talk about their loss. So yeah, this was a surprising finding to me because it just speaks to how difficult it is to overcome parental alienation. So many years later, they had had no contact, and their own adult children had had no contact in all these intervening years, even at the point where the children had children of their own. So these intergenerational effects of parental alienation, that really struck me. And they really had no hope, it seemed, of any kind of having contact. They were kind of resigned to the fact there's no way to overcome this. They've had so many years of being alienated from their own children, and they just didn't see any hope for the future. So a kind of learned helplessness was characteristic of this group of grandparents. I did ask them about their experiences with professional helpers, lawyers, mediators, therapists. Very few had even tried. And those few who did try were immediately discouraged, that they weren't really given any hope that anything could be restored. No one thinks about the fact that, there's a large population of alienated parents who over time will become alienated grandparents. But it seems that their feelings of loss and bereavement and trauma and, full-scale kind of post-traumatic stress reaction is even more acute than, than other grandparents who, I remember from that earlier study I did, grandparents who had had a previous relationship, they maintained some hope of reunification at some point. They clung to that, but this group of grandparents are just sort of resigned to their fate and unable to talk about it, but they did come forward and talk about it with me, and it was really quite powerful, the responses that I received. The other point being how powerful parental alienation can be. It transmits over several generations. There's some sense of acceptance, but that deep sense of loss and kind of trauma, as I say, is really quite prevalent. It just struck me how much of a double whammy, kind of a double loss it is for them, and how acute that can be. I do believe strongly that this is a much larger hidden population than anyone really would imagine. It's only now coming to light how prevalent parental alienation is and how many people are affected by that. But now it's now gone one generation further, and there's a sizable population of grandparents out there who've never met their grandchildren.